Morning everyone, I think it's 10 o'clock by the clock on the wall if it's correct up there. So I'm going to start the meeting and welcome to today's Audit Committee meeting. This is not a public meeting but a meeting the public can attend. I'm Austin White, Chair of the Audit Committee. I'd like to welcome everyone present to the Audit Committee today. Before we commence, I'd like to outline the domestic arrangements for the meeting. We are not expecting a fire practice today. If the alarm sounds, please leave the chamber, then turn right and proceed down the stairway and through the emergency exit on the ground floor. The assembly point is in the public square in front of CAS beyond the fountain. Anybody with mobility issues should wait in the refuge area near the lift and use the intercom to call for assistance. This meeting will be recorded and published on the Council's website. By entering the Council chamber, you are accepting that you will be recorded and your images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. If anyone intends to record today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode or switched off if you prefer. Thank you. I'll now commence the meeting. Apologies for absence is item 1. Apologies have been received from Councillors Barry Johnson and Dave Shaw and from our co-opted member Dr Stuart Green. So there's no further apologies on this side, so I don't think there's any apologies from officers attending. So we will move on to item 2, exclusion of the public and press. There are no items on the agenda where the public and press are to be excluded. Is that agreed, colleagues? Yeah. Okay. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Not this morning, no. So if anything crops up that we've not spotted, if we can complete the declaration form and forward it on to Governance Services. Item 4, minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 26th of January 2023. Can those minutes be moved as a true and accurate record, please? Yes, and Secretary John, thank you. And we're all agreed with that, and we'll move on to item 5, which is the Audit Committee Action Log. All members have read the report, and we'll proceed on that basis. So can I ask Peter Jackson, Head of Internal Audit, if he wishes to bring any specific issues to members' attention or has anything to add since the report was drafted? Peter.
No, Chair. All actions are complete. Nothing further to update on, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, that's right. That's how I read it, and no questions to be asked by me, colleagues. Glenn, no further questions on that. So we'll move on to item 6. And item 6. Oh, sorry, I'm forgetting to do the recommendation. I'm not that I'm in a hurry at all. So I'll read out the recommendation and the report. The committee is asked to note the progress being made against the actions agreed at the previous committee meetings and comment if further information updates are required. So is that moved and seconded, colleagues? Yes, thank you very much. We all agree. So the recommendations are noted. So I will now move to item 6, which are breaches and waivers to the Council's contract procurement rules, CPRs. Again, all members have read the report. So I'll ask Holly Wilson, Head of Procurement, if she wishes to bring any specific issues to members' attention or has anything to add to the report since it was drafted. Holly, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor White. I'll just quickly go through a few highlights. So the report period covers the 1st of September 22 to the 28th of February 23. The waivers granted for the period was 16, a slight decrease from 17 as previously reported in October 22. On breaches, positively there have been 5 resolved. 1 remains unresolved but is due to be resolved imminently for the meat contract. There have been 4 new breaches, 2 which have resulted as due to aggregated spend and 2 which have been created due to expired contracts. One of the new breaches in Appendix 1 for ventilation supplies is due for award on the 28th of April, which is tomorrow, so that will be resolved imminently. And Appendix 3 shows the percentage of waivers granted against the total value of contracts let. So that's what Audit asked for, the committee asked for some time back. So hopefully that's useful. There was an action from last time with regards to the projects and sort of system enhancements and so on that the procurement team were following through with. So from point 21 to 27, hopefully that's met that action, and I've covered off the different sort of streams of work that are being undertaken for many reasons, one of them being to improve compliance. I'm open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. As usual with breaches and waivers, and because it sounds bad this, but because we've got a lot of items in our breaches and waivers tables, I just wanted to remind myself and the committee that we're here to ensure the process for managing breaches and waivers is in place and being followed by officers, not necessarily looking at each individual waiver, which has been properly considered and approved by management. So the audit are looking for assurances regarding the arrangements to manage, approve and monitor breaches and waivers are in place and operating efficiently. So colleagues, any questions?
Thanks very much, Chair. Morning, Holly. Thanks very much for coming. I've just got a couple of questions regarding breaches, and thank you very much last year for doing the training with us. And from that, I've kind of taken that breaches are bad, waivers are good. Okay? I think that's a bit of a summary, or waivers are acceptable, shall we say. So I have that in the back of my mind when I read these reports. A couple of questions just about the breaches. I see that some were resolved. I'm interested of just why did some of these that occurred there, how did they come about, especially the ones that have been resolved? And then the new ones that are in there, you mentioned that some of them are due to aggregated spend. Could you just elaborate on what that means, please?
Yeah, so the first question regards the resolved ones and where they've occurred. I think there is a note from October 22 for each of those. It was due to contract expiry, and as I think I went into at the last audit committee, they were due to a belief that some of them were, I think, there were extensions available, there weren't. So it was misadministration, and they obviously had expired. So work was undertaken to get them sorted ASAP. And again, as mentioned at the last audit committee, we've done a lot of work and continue to work on our systems to make sure that those administrative errors do not occur in the future. With regards to the new breaches that have occurred, so on the aggregation ones, two of them are aggregated spend. So the ventilation supply, sorry, 2.3 and 2.1. I don't know where, I ain't got 2.2. But so on those ones, that is where we monitor spend that is going out to contractors for certain items on a quarterly basis. If that aggregation gets close to because obviously officers can direct toward up to 25k. But if they get close to 25k, we will then raise that in our quarterly monitoring reports to the heads or ADs. Sometimes, because it's a quarterly report, that means they will have already gone over that. And if we raise that, then sometimes there is a period of usually of minimum 3 months to get a contract in place. And unfortunately, those ones did breach because the spend that was going out has tipped over the 25k direct award. So we do pick them up. There's probably a multitude of reasons. We've spent less on those supplies previously because obviously we look at historical data and officers will use that to dictate the procurement route that they take. So if they say, look, we're spending less than 25k, we don't need to do a competition. Obviously, we always look at value for money, but they will obviously on those two item categories of spend, they have spent more, and that can be down to, my theory will be that the cost of items has significantly increased due to inflation. Obviously, the direct award threshold hasn't. So we're going to probably see that more, but we've already got in place plans to we will go to those heads of service and ADs earlier to say, you're heading towards 25, we need to do something about it.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. So just on the back of that, in terms of a root cause to why these issues are kind of taking place, the new ones I'm talking about, are we saying that these were avoidable if the teams had been monitoring this closely and watching what was happening with the prices? Or are we saying that because of the way our process is, these are inevitable and perhaps we need to change something in our process?
Yeah, we need to change something in our process. So the quarterly monitoring of aggregated spend for certain areas, and these two contracts sit within sort of the materials contracts. So we need to up the frequency of the monitoring of those contracts to probably on a monthly basis, so that we can intervene at an earlier stage as opposed to getting to the quarterly point. And it's also quite variable. So for example, public buildings maintenance, they will have heightened spend at certain periods of the year. So they do a lot of work for schools. Schools have a lot of works done over the summer holidays for obvious reasons. So they will spend a lot more in that period than they would, say, at another time. So there's no exact science to it, but we do need to get smarter on that monitoring and probably pick up those ones on a monthly basis.
Thank you. And that explains the ones with no contract. But just in terms of the ones where the contract has expired, that's not down to the process. That is just because they weren't monitoring it. Am I right?
They have come about due to a multitude of issues. The one, and this is not an excuse, but capacity-wise, there's been some officer changes, and those contracts would have started to be looked at, and capacity has been an issue to get those contracts sorted. Usually those materials contracts are quite straightforward re-procurements because we've been buying timber and I forgot which one the other one is for forever. The issue we're facing at the moment with the way that merchants are working from a commercial aspect is they can't guarantee pricing like they have done previously. We're having to do a lot more with the re-procurement than we would usually. Merchants are saying to us, do not bother coming out for fixed price contracts. We will not bid for those. We need to really significantly look at the types of items that we're buying, and if we can substitute with something that is is deemed better value but might not be of equal quality, because the inflationary situation we're in at the moment is causing problems for us. So it's a multitude of issues, and yes, those contracts have not been dealt with in time, but they are obviously being dealt with now.
Thanks, Holly. Mine's a general question, really. When we talk about waivers, etc., and contract compliance, are we not utilising IT to give us the warning, like 20-day warning, 10-day warning, etc.? I realise there are practical issues involved there, but nevertheless, we have IT systems. Are we not using them?
You're right. We have got, and the procurement team run the IT systems for contracts and so on. So we have the Your Tender system is our e-tendering portal. That's where our tenders and quotes go out from. So I've put it in the body of the report. We have been running procurement plans on spreadsheets, and that has caused us problems, which I did speak about at October's meeting, because obviously spreadsheets are only as good as the data that is going in, and also how officers overwriting information and so on. So it's a problem. It has been a problem area. we have put in the procurement planning module. That's currently being populated. It's quite a big task, as you can imagine. We've got thousands of contracts that need to go into that. So that does have a smarter system of alerting us to contracts that are coming to an end, and also that, you know, where they are in the procurement process. So if something's not moving at the rate it should be, the seniors within my team will pick that up and obviously tackle it. So that system will help a lot. The other system we use, which is our spend analysis system, where we get the spend analysis, we get the aggregated information out of, that holds the council's contracts register as well. And within that, there are alerts that we have set up that go to contract owners, that alerting them that their contract is going to expire in 3 months, 6 months. So we do have the systems there, and they are being utilised. But again, it comes down to movement of departments to do something, but we're doing as much as we can. But again, it's capacity and yeah.
Yes, Scott.
I think it's fair to say that what you've been provided with in those two spreadsheets is a warts and all very, very honest delivery on that. I could deal with breaches tomorrow. I could wipe them out because I could just sign waivers. So you'd have 5 or 6 or 10 more waivers and no breaches. We won't do that because that's A, the easy way out, and it's not honest. So literally, if people come to us at the end of the hour because they haven't got their act into gear and want a waiver, they're not getting it, and it becomes a breach. So there's an element here that actually our good cop, bad cop approach, if you want to call it like that, actually is generating more breaches than it is waivers. But that's the way in which we're doing it, because otherwise we're hiding an issue. You're seeing absolutely what there is there, and it is not an easy place to get a waiver because you've got to go through Holly's team, you've got to go through Holly, and then you've got to go through me if it's my area, or Faye if it's me if it's not my area, and Faye if it's not mine. I mean, some of these waivers are things that actually aren't very, very easy to procure. The maintenance of this chamber equipment is one of those waivers. It's a bespoke contract that was delivered at the time that we built this. It's not actually possible, I don't think, to get someone to maintain someone else's equipment. But according to our rules, it requires a waiver. And some of the other ones are similar. I think the point of me sort of interjecting is that I want to give you assurance that we are pushing at these. We're never going to get to a point whereby there are none and none, but it is not an easy route through for people to get waivers. And as I say, we use breaches almost as a tool to sort of get people to do that. We have got systems in place. We have got contract lists and systems, and as an AD or as a head of service, you get a list of your expiring contracts. You get some support from the resource that we have to re-procure that. If I'm fair to people, they've got other things to do as well. Some people's sole job is procurement. Some people's job is other things, and they procure once a flood. So that does have to fly into the mix as well. But I do want to give assurance that we are on this, and I would love one day to come here with none and none. I'm not sure I'm going to live long enough to quite achieve that, but you know, we'll keep aiming for it. Certainly no breaches. I think breach bad, waiver good was a flavour of something that was said about 10 years ago by the previous corporate director. I think you're probably right when you say breaches are bad and waivers are better, but not great.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I mean, I have noticed that the waivers are more or less constant. They're sitting between that 14 and 17 band, and I would get worried if that suddenly jumped to in the mid-20s and we had no breaches. But I would like to see, and I've discussed this with Austin before and Pete, that I'd like to basically have a zero tolerance approach on the breaches. And I think your approach sounds very good in the fact that you are saying if it's beyond the date, then you're not getting a waiver, and I think that's the right approach. But I think I'd like to go further, and that if somebody does get in the position where they have a breach, I think they should be here to kind of explain how they got in that position, especially once Holly's amended the process with the monitoring. So I'll just throw that open and see how Austin and John feel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as Glenn mentioned there, it is a subject that Audit Committee are interested in, and I think we always have been, and we have come a long way from where we were a number of years ago, where the numbers of breaches, the number of waivers was totally unacceptable, and you'll recall that, Scott. And I think the main point from this report is the continuing low number of breaches and the understandable number of waivers. However, when the numbers become consistently low, any breaches become a focus for the Audit Committee. So that's sort of a downside of being successful in some ways, isn't it? And over the years, the mantra has been breaches are bad, waivers are good. And I think I had a quick chat with Holly earlier that I'd probably like to get that mindset that breaches are bad, waivers are better. They're not necessarily good because it does highlight that something is wrong. And as Glenn said, I'd like to get to a point where there's no breaches and no waivers to the council's contract procurement rules. It's a big ask, but if you don't have an objective, then you've got nothing to aim for. And I do appreciate all the effort that yourself signing them off or not signing them off, and typically the same with Faye and Holly's team in monitoring this process. So yeah, there's been a great improvement in the relative numbers, but the officers who are procuring the goods and services should, and I'm not saying are, should be fully aware of the contract procurement rules. And with correct implementation of the rules, together with the assistance of the strategic procurement team, the objective of no breaches and waivers, or no breaches at all, and waivers only occurring in exceptional circumstances. And I understand you've got plans to refine the processes and the systems, because I was listening closely to what you were saying there, and particularly in construction, because that's my field of expertise, if I've got any expertise. And I know that it's very, very difficult to predict costs when you're doing feasibility estimates and the like, because as you go through doing a cost plan for a project, every time you get to the next stage, everything keeps going up, so you can't monitor it. But when it actually comes around to spending, do you set the contracts with a financial limit? So if it got to a point, I know you said that suppliers don't want fixed price, which is understandable, but if it got to a limit, and I don't know if there is a limit to contracts that are put in place, then you won't be able to pay it, so you wouldn't breach the limit. I don't know if that's the case, but perhaps that's something you could look at. And I know I can speak make it sound very easy, but I know the technical side and the IT side of doing it. Don't ask me how to do it, because I don't know. But if I may just go on. In the report, paragraphs 21 to 27 expands on the arrangements to reduce breaches and waivers as requested at the October's Audit Committee. And I've just got a few comments to make there. So I've noted that the CPR training is available for officers to book. The CPR training programme is available for officers to book online. So to me, that's implying that the training is voluntary. So can we look for this training to be a mandatory requirement for those officers who are responsible? Not for every officer in that section, but those who are responsible, which will remove any reason for non-compliance. And as Glenn says earlier, if they don't then comply, they've got no reason for not complying, no excuse, and then they can answer the question because you've got the log on that's been kept, that they've been on the training and they fully understand the training. So further, it's just something for a suggestion, a consideration. It's good to see the procurement system continues to be developed and improved, with procurement projects being uploaded, allowing for better planning and visibility on procurement projects. Did you say, Holly, I noticed there's a date that will be implemented by the 30th of April. Did you say in your presentation that it's still on target? That's on page 14, item 25. Will it be done by the 30th, or did you say it's already been done now?
It's the, not to get too technical, there's spreadsheets that we upload into the system in a template format. So they're currently being populated and they're going this week. So we are on target.
Good.
But obviously once it goes in, we then need to make sure it's gone in right.
Yeah.
The UAT took a bit longer than we wanted, but yeah.
It's on programme. Good. And as Glenn touched on there, like new projects, or old contracts. So consideration to existing contracts, and like many times it's been an existing contract that causes the breach or the waiver because it's come to an end with no timely replacement in place. And there's examples on page 19. The reason is an oversight and the contract continued to be used. There's also one, new contract in place but not used. Old contract continued to be used. Well, that might be termed as unacceptable, perhaps, because, you know, why haven't you used it? So again, if that is something there. So I don't know if you want to respond to any of those comments that I've made there. And I would say that the Audit Committee recognise the work that's being done by the Strategic Procurement team and by senior officers who are monitoring and signing them off. And we absolutely support those individuals carrying out that role. What we're concerned about, it still seems to be that there's officers lower down, if that's not a very nice term, but actually doing the works who are ignoring the process and the systems. I don't know if you want to come back on anything, Holly, because then I wanted to go on a couple of the waivers that we've got today.
I think that's useful feedback, Chair. As I said before, the message that waivers are have to catch muster because they won't be signed off by either Holly then by me is useful in itself, but actually the sense of the messaging that Audit Committee are very, very live to these processes and actually are very, very concerned about deviations from process is a useful one for us. It's useful messaging for us to get out there to senior colleagues, and certainly we'll review how we're doing training. I think sometimes targeted training is as useful as broad brush, and certainly we've got a few to go out there, haven't we, in terms of our first appendix of breaches and those teams that are on there. I mean, obviously we are quite a dynamic organisation. We have got a significant contracting requirement, and we try and do that in a way that both delivers product when it's needed, delivers value, but also deals with local spend requirements and desires to spend money locally rather than big broad brush framework agreements where things can be coming from elsewhere. We do try and help that local spend wherever we can. So that does make the position slightly more complicated, but I think we'll definitely review the training process that we've got and push that out a little bit more with a little bit more vigour, and hopefully perhaps next quarter might be or the next report might be slightly ambitious, but I'd like to think that the one after that we might start to see a little bit of movement down on some of those breaches.
Thank you for that, Scott.
Thank you. Can I just add, because I think, as Scott said, it's really, really helpful feedback to kind of put back into the organisation in terms of the steer from Audit Committee and that kind of, you know, the approach that actually no breaches is the aim. I was just wondering if, I suppose, coming in terms of the training, one of the areas that we've kind of targeted for finance training is budget holders, so that's one area that we can kind of look at, and whether there's anything we can kind of do jointly as well, to kind of align some of those, some of that training. The other one was whether, I know there's the, you know, we'd like to bring officers here to Audit Committee if there are breaches, and I just wondered whether Holly and the team kind of have a look at an escalation process. So it's about, you know, timescales, isn't it, in terms of how long there've been a breach, or, you know, and what the, you know, the reasons for the breach are, or what the value. So we can have a look at kind of some of those escalations, and at what point it then, Holly feels it needs to kind of be escalated.
We support that process.
Yeah, and I just wanted to come back on an earlier discussion point that was had about the why breaches are occurring, and reflecting on the thresholds we have in terms of procurement levels. 25 grand has been devalued significantly as a result of the current inflation. We set it as based on intelligence at that point in time, based on the activity, but I think it's a good, is it 3 years when we set that? So it's 4. There you go. COVID has really, time-wise, put you know, in some things made it really helpful because you've got a time frame, and other things it's you just the time's really gone by. So just the time value, I think it's 25,000 is an awful lot of money. So I think that's something we do need to look at in the context of the level of the nature of the spend, the activities that are happening, and what would be more appropriate. We'll look at benchmarking again in terms of what neighbouring authorities have as their threshold, with a view to making some propositions really for amendment, because I think it's a bit overdue.
On that point, sorry, just to come in, I have done some of that work, Debbie, because you're right, other authorities are starting to enact different thresholds for different categories of spend as well. So from memory, I think York have gone up to, I think 75k for construction related contracts. So what I'll do is I'll collate that benchmarking information from peers, because we are connected regionally, and I'll get that information together, because it is a really valid point.
Yeah, thanks for all those comments. They're supportive. And I was just going back to John's point that, you know, I'm not an IT whiz by any means. I don't know if any of us are in this room, but we've got staff in the organisation that could introduce a system where, I don't know how many months it would be before your contract's going to come to an end. You've got to be planning, because it's not an overnight to develop a set of tender documents, go out to tender, evaluate it, and award. It all takes time, and that is the real critical time, the bit between or the months leading up to the termination of the existing, and perhaps you can get that in, and then you'll have that data that the officers who are operating the contracts will have, and you can say, have you done it? When are you going to do it? You know, time's running out. That time's running out. So that's that one. I think we've gone enough over that, and unless Glenn wanted to come back.
Sorry.
Yeah. On that, we have got a system that does trigger an email to contract owners, but again, someone has to do something with that trigger. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just really a general question. I did notice in here that you mentioned about the purchasing card policy. And I wondered if we could, as audit committee, could get some kind of numbers regarding any breaches to that policy. Because I've been following the numbers online for a few quarters now. And obviously, and I think you've explained it here, that the reason that the purchasing amounts are going up is because of the onboarding of the Children's Services Trust. But I do find it fascinating when I see things like £30 at Wowburger, £200 at Yard Mares, and £2 grand at Land Rover. I'd love to know if they're all compliant with the policy or not. So it would be nice, I think, if we could see that in some kind of report to the audit committee. Thank you.
Yeah, the policy's actually just been signed off, the new policy. So obviously compliance will be monitored, but we've not started that yet. But yeah, happy for that.
Okay, with colleagues' permission or approval, I want to go through a couple of the waivers, just to give a little bit more background to the to the reason box, if you like. We've got on items 1 to 1.4, 1.0, 1.4. I don't know if you're giving any some more context to the adults, public health waivers, rehomelessness, complex need, substance abuse, Holly. Then I've got one on 2.4, which when I read the reason for the waiver, to me it didn't tell me what the £72,000 was actually for. And I know that's a bit of an old chestnut, is that contract, and it's gone on for a long, long time. And I didn't know whether that was to strengthen a floor, provide the racking, install sprinklers, or what it was for, or whether it was to pay the existing contract for another year or whatever. So that was just a little bit confusing to me. And I think maybe I speak for my colleagues as well, maybe not. Smart bins, that one, the smart bins one, from a council's perspective, it's one topic that comes to our concern quite a lot from residents, that they're concerned about littering, the provision of waste bins, the emptying of waste bins. So from a council's perspective, it's an interesting one. And on the committee, it mentions there in both rural and high footfall areas. Well, we've got members on the committee that come from both rural and high footfall wards. So whether you could give us a little bit background to that one. That's all from me on these particular ones. I've probably gone against my own rules saying we shouldn't be interrogating individual waivers, but it's just a little bit more background, please.
On the smart bin one, that is a trial purchase, so that's permissible because obviously that could be a fantastic revelation. So that's why that's been granted, to allow them to.
I've got no problem with all the issues being granted, but is that like?
Yeah, the team will basically, it's ultimately rather than having a schedule, whether there's any rubbish in or not, we'll have a schedule that will have deployment of resources based on the need to empty the bin. That's the proposition. So it's more rather than being scheduled, it'll be more proactive.
Document storage, I think, isn't the one that you're thinking of, which is not archive, which has been here a few times. Document storage is the storage of paper records that were generated, ironically, some of which probably dated back to when you were an officer and had never been thrown out. So when we moved from the myriad of buildings we occupied into here, there was a requirement to rationalise paper because there wasn't the storage that there had been before. Some things were disposed of and some things were put into storage. That initial storage contract wasn't very good. We found a better one, which is at Hull and is compliant with information governance protocols, GDPR, safe storage. And those things have been over there. They are checked and periodically brought back, or elements of them are brought back, gone through and disposed of where necessary if they've passed retention requirements. In an ideal world, we would now have something more local, which we could manage better and which would be owned by us. That's not proved possible for a variety of reasons. Partially kind of COVID delays and various other things have not helped, but are not a full excuse. It's a extension of that contract for a further period while we basically rerun a procurement, because the intention is we would have got out of it by now, but getting out of it is proving to be frustrating. Yeah, well, in whatever building we ever found locally, then yes, we would have to produce proper racking to make best use of that, and it would need to have proper the security and sprinklers and whatever else. But
I mean, I heard not necessarily. You said it. The system in Hull is fully compliant. I'd heard stories about it was very difficult to get in there and get the documents that you wanted, but for officers. But it's, I mean, it's quite remote in a way. But if the short-term objective is to get everything back locally into a building that we own, then that building is fully compliant.
yeah, I mean, it's not been my experience that it's hard to get hold of things. They are stored in a logical fashion, and if you identify the box that you want, it will come back. But it's not great in terms of anything in terms of cost, carbon, or anything else to have your documents bussed across from Hull. It's very much a topic of its time, and it's probably past its date. But it's not the easiest thing to replace, because apart from anything else, it's quite a logistical operation. But also we are now generating substantially less paper because everything's in a cloud or online, or very most things are.
Yes, so the homelessness 1.3, that was a failed retender. We had, I suppose how much there's quite a lot of detail, but we went out to market, we engaged with the market, and we did get 22 interested providers. When we went out to tender, none submitted a bid. That contract needs to continue for obvious reasons. We're in a position where we could permissibly do that legally under the regulations, because it met the standard required in the regulations. So that has been extended for a 2-year period. Again, the provider, the incumbent, would not extend for any less, which is understandable because they've got staffing and assets and so on. Until we, the full strategy is delivered on homelessness as a larger piece of work, which there is a homelessness board, and work is continuing on that. The smaller contracts are sort of related to that. When we get, it's sort of a bit of a difficult situation. We get bits of grant funding or coming through on it to help, support those programs of work. We obviously can't give that. It would be not, value for money and best practice for us to say, right, well, that, that 50k of that, we're going to give it to a different provider because there's a bigger contract already working. So those waivers are actually additions to an existing contract, but we have a governance process where we note those so that it's visible and transparent to audit, because they can't be competed, basically, because there's an overarching contract. I think that's.
And I know that in there that they extended it for 12 months, so that gives enough time for work to be done to get a new contract in place in 12 months' time. And I do appreciate that these are much better than we were, well, can't be that long ago because I can remember it, but it's, that way the solar centre, if people remember that, went on for years and years and years, extending it and extending the contract. We don't want to get down that road. So that's all from me. Colleagues, nothing else? I was just going to ask, and I think you probably answered this question before I ask it, both Holly and Scott, are you satisfied with the arrangements we've got in place? And I think the answer would probably be yes, but we can make improvements, so I don't need to ask that question. So as a final comment on this item, I just want to note that Holly's team are essential and very helpful to the Audit Committee, and I consider the current position regarding breaches and waivers, which is a relatively good position from where we were, to be attributable to the commitment of both the Strategic Procurement Team and the Audit Committee to manage and reduce the number of occurrences. So So on that note, I think we've all finished with our questions, and I said it probably would be the longest item on today's agenda. I will move to the recommendations within the report. The Audit Committee is asked to note the waivers and breaches recorded for the period between the 1st of September 2022 and the 28th of February 2023, and to note work undertaken by the strategic procurement team to ensure compliance and deliver services. Is that moved, colleagues, and seconded? Yeah. Yes, and we're all agreed. So the recommendations are noted. And we'll now move on to item 8. No, we won't. Item 7. I had to just jump one out now. The annual report of the Monitoring Officer, 2022-23. We've all read the report, Scott, so if I can ask you as the Monitoring Officer if you wish to bring any specific issues to the members' attention or add anything since the report was drafted.
I hope the report largely speaks for itself. I will make my almost traditional comment that despite the fact that this item warrants a separate item, the actual number of complaints across Doncaster, across the almost 50 town and parish councils and the people that work in this chamber, the number of complaints received remains low. The number of actionable complaints remains even lower. I think that is testament to what is generally very, very good standards of behaviour across the board. And also within that report, there's a nil money laundering report notice, which is testament to the work that's been done in previous generations in relation to this, because that's been that work's been done for a long, long time now. And the whistleblowing return of 2. And I look forward to the almost annual question of whether or not a low number of whistleblowers is a good thing or a bad thing, which we can no doubt deal with later. But I hope it speaks for itself, that report.
Thank you, Scott. And as I say, as you mentioned as you started off, traditional questions, traditional report, and probably traditional responses from Audit Committee members. And it's a usual report with the very much the usual message, positive report as usual. And you mentioned there the number of complaints, a drop of 8 to 5 for the authorities councillors and a drop of 12 to 11 for parish. I was going to ask you if you've had any knowledge of other councils in our area, or whether they don't come across your radar. But how does the continuing low numbers of Doncaster compare with areas in our region and nationally? Are those statistics not available?
I think our statistics are quite low in comparison to other ones. I think things generally depend on things like the political makeup of your council, the personalities of the councillors involved, quite frankly. Change, when political control has changed in an authority, that often stirs up difficulties, new councillors finding their ways. And I think fundamentally complaints received seem to be almost symptomatic of actual differences of policy. A lot of times, I think if you don't like what someone is doing, sometimes, if you don't like what someone is doing, sometimes their approach may make you want to find a complaint about them. I've seen a little bit of that. I think I mentioned this, I won't name the council, but I think Council Bluff knows exactly what I mean. There was a council that was subject to quite some substantial differences between some of the people in the borough and some of its councillors, and that saw itself out in lots of complaints. But fundamentally, it was about something that was going on in the area, and they didn't like the way in which the councillors were dealing with it or not dealing with it. I've seen that elsewhere. And you get little patches of these. You get councillors who somehow have upset people, and you get 3 or 4 complaints about them about different things. You could think it was vexatious or a complaint if you were so inclined. or a campaign if you were so inclined, but generally speaking, they're not breaches of the code as we understand it and as it's set out in the LGA, because it's pretty clear the things that you are caught for as a council and the things that you're not caught for.
Yeah, so to your knowledge, we're on the right side of the average, as it were. Money laundering, as usual, nil money laundering reports raised, which is good. And I was just thinking, so is it the case that none were raised because none were detected? So you wouldn't know about them until you find them. And have our procedures identified any potential money laundering activities which were investigated and then found to be legitimate business?
I think that's more a question for Peter and Faye. However, money laundering traditionally was around people wanting to pay for large assets using cash, which has become more noticeable these days if it was going to happen, because we've obviously moved towards not a cashless society, but certainly a cash light society. So people wanting to buy large plots of land with carrier bags of notes these days would be more noticeable than it ever was. But our processes are pretty strong and have been in place for a long, long time, and I think we're very alive to that. But certainly if someone wants to pay a bill in large amounts of money, it would be more noticeable than it ever was.
Yes, Chair. So there's training available for any officers that deal with the receipting of monies. The procedures are very clear that there's a certain limit for cash that can be taken for a transaction. I think it's around about 11 grand-ish, something around that area. So basically the preventative control should identify, should prevent those sort of transactions taking place. I think it's several years since we came across an incident where that limit had been breached, and that was simply resolved, and it's been an area where we've been very compliant with the money laundering regulations as far as we're concerned. As Scott's saying, it's a much less cashless society, therefore that sort of inherent risk is now dropping anyway, Chair.
That's fine.
Yeah, just say our financial procedure rules include that the council will not accept cash income for the purchase of goods with a value of greater than 11,000. What we, as Scott and Pete have kind of talked about, really cash is reducing in society, and as a council we've got a cashless strategy. It's not a no cash, because we know we can't kind of go to that, but we're reducing the cash, the method of paying for cash for services and delivered. So wherever possible, we're looking for providing the payment up front by card, those kind of means. So that's our strategy, and that's what we're kind of constantly looking to achieve. So we're reducing the use of cash across the organisation. There are some areas where we potentially can't, like petty cash for some of the homes and things like that, which we've kind of discussed in the past, but that's our strategy, to reduce the use of cash anyway.
Finally, usual question. Is the number low because the process is relatively unknown and difficult to access? And are staff periodically reminded that the process is there and how to use it? That's whistleblowing, yes.
Yes, they are periodically reminded, and I'm looking to get something on our intranet homepage pretty soon, to be perfectly honest. And I push things out to leadership colleagues, reminding them of the process as well. Who knows, I suppose would be the answer. I would like to think that we are a transparent organisation, and I think we have an openness of process, and I think there are also other ways in which people can raise grievances without whistleblowing. Without going into any more detail, as in the report on the two whistleblowers, one of them was a member of staff, one of them wasn't, well, certainly a direct member of staff. So that suggests there is some wider awareness of it. and that individual had clearly read the policy because they telephoned me directly and cited it. So there is clearly an awareness of it, and I think in that case it was an appropriate step for them to cite that policy because they did have some concerns over their employment status if they were known to be the person bringing it forward. Again, we kind of have this conversation around what do other authorities' numbers tell us. I think I'll probably just say what I said slightly before. I think that depends what's going on in that authority. I think that's what you see. I think if you are undergoing controversial changes or controversial policies, or you are in some manner of publicity, the chances are your whistleblower numbers will go up. And I think we saw that with a city not so far from here when they were cutting down some trees. We saw that then, and I think there's a potential we might see it in relation to some of the other things that have been going on here. But again, we've been pretty transparent around the things that we do, and I think that helps. So, but our numbers are pretty consistent. I thought we'd had less last year, but actually when I look back, it was the same. So,
colleagues, any further questions on this item?
question
from Glenn.
Thanks very much, Scott. Just in terms of whistleblowing, do we let our third parties know, and do they publicise if they had any staff that had a problem with us? Do we publicise the whistleblowing number and links to them?
do you mean partners, Councillor? Or what, when you say third party, sorry?
Anybody who works closely with us who's involved with any of the officers, for example?
We do, but I think I probably need to think about how we do that and make sure there's some reminders going out there. We adopted a pretty wide whistleblower policy, certainly much wider than the law requires, and we've made it open to others. I think generally speaking, the law requires you to make it available to your own employees. We made it much wider than that, and certainly partners and users, service users can take advantage of it. So yeah, I think we'll look at how we push that message out a little bit more.
And just out of curiosity, would I be able to find the number on this floor somewhere? Is it in the breakout areas or anywhere like that?
A phone number on a poster? I don't think you will, no, but you'll find it on the intranet.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll now move to the recommendations within the report that the Audit Committee. 1 notes the Monitoring Officer Annual Report on complaint handling activity for the period 1st April 2022 to 31st March 2023. 2 notes the whistleblowing return for 2022-23, and 3 notes the nil money laundering report for 2022-23. Is that moved and seconded, colleagues? Yes. Thank you very much. The recommendations are noted. I'll move on to item 8. Production of the 2022-23 draft annual governance statement. All members have read the report, so I'll ask Debbie Hogg, Director of Corporate Resources, if she wishes to bring anything specific to members' attention, or if she has anything to add to the report since it was drafted. Debbie.
Thanks, Chair. The report's fairly self-explanatory. Processes are well established in terms of the methodology we have in place to produce this report. It's a bottom-up, top-down process. As you can see, we have a broader perspective than in terms of our approach for collating this, and the matters that we want to include within the AGS for 22-23 is reflective almost of the not so much that they are issues that have impacted on the organisation, but more things that we want to have in view in order to ensure that we're giving close attention to the prevailing issues within those matters. They're sort of covered in some detail within the annex to the report, and I'm happy to take any questions on those about whether there's any why they're there or what we're doing about them. And in terms of if there's any new matters at this stage, no, sorry, Chair, there isn't. It's we only collated this over the last month or so, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Debbie on this one, colleagues? Nothing? Nothing, John? No? No questions. Just one from me, Debbie. The recommendation is for the Chair and the members of Audit Committee are to review and endorse the outline of the draft annual governance statement. Now, I've seen somewhere that's prior to their publication for consultation as part of the draft accounts in July 2023. 2023, can we have an update on that revised estimate timescale? Is that?
So in terms of the process, what happens is this comes to you for consideration, gets incorporated into the council's accounts, and then, as you know, we've got an obligation to undertake that review. If there's any post accounts matters of significant nature, that would be then reflected on and incorporated into this. So we've got a multi-stage process along a 6-month timescale. So the accounts will get published, as I say, following this. It'll incorporate the information that's contained within the annex, and then we'll be reviewing over the summer months during whilst the audits being undertaken about whether there's any substantive matters, and then that would be incorporated or not, as the case may be. So a number of stages to the process. So it's very much a live document.
Gareth.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to say, I mean, it's good to see the draft AGS has come before the committee today in advance of sort of the year-end process, which is good practice and gives you and other members and indeed other stakeholders, the opportunity to comment and reflect on the content, which again is a positive. I guess it was just an initial comment from me, Chair, which I'll pick up later under the last item on the agenda today. In terms of the paragraph on page 4 or page 57, which is the final paragraph before it says our approach to risk management, which talks about the 22-23 audit and VFM audit concluding for 30th September. That is not going to be achievable, which we'll pick up in more detail under one of our items. But other than that, I think, again, a really positive thing to bring this draft at this time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Gareth. Just one more question from me. That's for Peter. Peter, in the Head of Internal Audit report, which is item 10, a bit further on the agenda, you refer to supporting preparation of the annual governance statement. So what involvement do you have in the annual governance statement, or have you had, to be able to do this? And therefore, are you satisfied that the annual governance statement accurately reflects governance at Doncaster?
Short answer, Chair, yes, I am happy that this does reflect our governance arrangements in Doncaster. It's consistent with items within my annual report. Those didn't actually identify any specific items for the AGS, but I have had input into the items that are included. There is a diagrammatic on page 49 which shows my role, part of other officers with governance responsibilities input there. I also have a role in the sort of technical input, making sure that the AGS is compliance with best practice, and we're putting in all the necessary narrative at the front end of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, Faye.
Yeah, just a quick one. Just following on from Gareth's update, we will update the AGS so that it's just timing, because we kind of produced this, then we've kind of got the audit plan. So we'll just we'll update this so it aligns with the audit plan.
Thank you. So if no further questions from members of the committee, I'll move to the recommendation within the report. The Chair and members of the Audit Committee are asked to review and endorse the outline of the draft annual governance statement prior to being published for consultation as part of the 2022-23 City of Doncaster Council draft accounts. Is that moved and seconded, colleagues? Thank you, that's agreed. Moving on to item 9, Audit Committee Annual Report 2022-23. Again, all members have read the report, so I'll ask Peter if he wishes to bring anything specific. Any specific issues to members' attention, or if anything's been added to the report since it was drafted. I'll just move on to the report now. I think my belief is a positive report that shows the work done by the committee over the year and the positive impacts achieved. And those achievements I've noted in the Chair of Audit's foreword. So we'll take that part of the report as read as well. So over to you, Pete.
Yes, Chair. So this is a report consistent with previous year's format. We've had some quite long discussions over it. As you say, the foreword reflects your input into it. I haven't included the effectiveness assessment review as we have done in previous years, but I have instead, as an appendix, included the sort of improvement plan, the action plan that arose from that effectiveness review, with 3 relatively minor issues to be actioned in there. Other than that, Chair, you know, this is your committee's report, so over to yourself, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. One, just a minor one on page 74, the second bullet on the left-hand side. We don't do an annual audit letter anymore. It's the auditor's annual report, which, to be fair, the rest of the document does reflect that title throughout. So I think I'd just tweak that. And I think it's just one to consider, Chair, that I suppose the audit process for a council the size of Doncaster to have the accounts and the VFM report all concluded by January, which in effect was the earliest it could be done because of the infrastructure issue. That was a real achievement. I'm not just saying that from our perspective, because obviously that takes an awful lot of work from Faye and team and you as a committee. So it might just be worth just drawing that out a little bit more, because I suspect there are not many large metropolitan councils that were in that position nationally. And again, that's something else we'll probably pick up in my paper on the last item, Chair. Thank you.
That's a fair comment, and thank you for drawing that to our attention. And I'm aware of that when I go off to the meetings with the head of, chairs of audit or other organisations, and they're quite a long way behind. We haven't done last year's yet, never mind the current one. Yeah, yes. Have my mic on. Annual report from the head of internal audit 2022-23. Again, we've all read the report. Peter, if you wish to bring anything specific to members' attention or inform us of anything that's been added to the report since it was drafted, over to you.
Chair, as I was drafting this report and finalising it, it felt very much a similar feel to last year's report. Lots of real positive areas within it, low levels of overdue actions and so on. We didn't highlight any particularly serious areas of concern this year, and I think the key statement in here is that I'm happy to give a positive opinion over the Council's risk governance and control arrangements. I've been assessing this on a sort of rolling basis, as the year progressed and hope to be able to do this. It's very important assurance for the committee after this last year, and I think it's a credit to the culture and tone from the top in being a well-managed and governed organisation. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Colleagues, any questions for Peter on his report this morning? Just one from me, Peter, which you probably would expect. I can't let you get away with no questions at all. Yes, I've noticed there's no serious points of concern raised this year. I wanted to go to the implementation of agreed management actions, paragraph 4.8. There are only 6 actions overdue across the authority. Arrangements to follow up on agreed management actions are considered effective. And the authority is in a strong position regarding the low number, I believe, of overdue actions. Para 6.5 details a large number of overdue actions at schools, which I understand are excluded from the mainstream numbers. So could I just ask what action has been taken regarding these overdue actions, the ones that relate to the schools? I know what happens to ours.
Yes, so Chair, as you say, the numbers are excluded from the mainstream audit actions because they're rated in a different way, and school audits always traditionally generate a high number of actions, but these are all just relevant to the individual school and not to the authority as a whole. So taking the decision to not include those within the mainstream council figures, it completely skews them away. So we work with the schools when we've generated these and got the actions agreed with them. It's generally with the school business manager and the school head and the chair of governors. These ones have been particularly sticky ones. It does happen sometimes. So we've got a new head of service now in place covering schools called Jane Reid. We've had an initial meeting with her, and we're actually meeting with her this afternoon regarding sort of escalation processes, and she's indicated she's going to be very supportive in contacting these schools and really stressing the importance that they put in place the actions alongside the previous steps that we've taken in trying to get these actions addressed. So hoping, Chair, to be able to report much lower numbers on these going forward.
Peter, any further questions, colleagues?
More or less a statement.
Okay, yeah, fine.
Pete, just to say, it is pleasing to see that the numbers have come down across all the overdue actions. Obviously, a couple of years ago, they were in the 40s, and now we've come down to single digits. So that's very pleasing to see. It's not really so much of a question, but given the fact that the numbers have come down on the overdue actions so much, and also some of the other issues, high-risk items that we're raising have come down as well, does it mean that maybe we should change our approach for our audits for the year, or should we take more of an agile approach? Just an open question, really.
We are trying to adopt a more agile approach. There is lesser coverage on the assurance type audits, the traditional finance audits. We are trying to develop our capacity to be more data driven there. So we've got sort of like real-time assurance being generated out of those systems. That's still work in progress. We've got an active recruitment process taking place for that at the moment. There's a lot of advisory work sitting in on some sort of key work areas, say around the DSG side of things within children's services. We're putting a lot of time in there in sort of overseeing arrangements, and so that sort of work doesn't necessarily generate high risk findings. It's hopefully preventing issues being raised and helping move forward, getting better, adding value to those arrangements that are in place. So we are acting in an agile way. There is some ongoing work which I'm expecting to be generating more numbers, and our risk-based plan does really reflect the sort of genuine will to put our very limited resources into the areas where we can add most value. We're developing our audit software systems so that we are doing more detailed assessments, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, I think, when it comes to the counter-fraud plan, which is the next one. There's like a heat map in there. Going forward, we'll be able to generate these assessed heat maps for all the different directorates across the council, and that ensures that we can sort of justify the focus of our audit work going forward.
Yeah, just to add to Glenn's comment, mine is that I think the report is very much what the audit committee were expecting. You know, having received the updates during the year, there are no unexpected items, and much assurance has been provided for the committee. And I've also noted, having read section 8 of the report, and Pete, I think you reiterated it in your initial address, that the head of internal audit is able to provide a full and qualified opinion over these arrangements. So that's another good point. So I will move to the recommendation for item 10, and that is the committee is asked to note the internal audit annual report for 2022-23, including confirmation that the council's government, risk management and control arrangements were adequate and operated efficiently during the year, and to note that the head of internal audit self-assessment that the service is compliant with the public sector internal audit standards, maintaining the outcome from the external quality assessment carried out during the 2021-22 year, which confirmed the highest level of conformance with the relevant public sector internal audit standards. So moved and seconded, colleagues, and all agreed, thank you very much. Move to item 11, which is the internal audit plan. Take the report as read by members of the committee. Peter, so unless you want to bring anything specific to members' attention or add anything to the report since it was drafted, I'll hand over to you.
Just a very quick summary, Chair. So the plan is split into 3 areas. So we've got the more routine planned audit work. There's the planned advice and consultancy work, which I've just talked about, and then we've got a separate counter-fraud plan within there. This is like best practice that we've had for about 3 years now. The plan talks about it being delivered flexibly, so that hopefully fits in with the agility question from the previous agenda item. And we've got quite a lot of contingency in that plan at the moment as well to allow for the flexibility. And I guess the key thing here is the sufficiency of work for us to be able to be done, for it to be able to contribute towards my annual opinion and the ability to be able to give one alongside the many other sources of assurance that we rely on. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions? Yes, John.
Can I go to page 114? I'm curious in terms of the audit plan. You've got down under children and young people and families, school 1, right? How do you determine which school?
We don't specify the schools at this stage of the plan, and we try and keep it flexible so that we can be responsive. So if we get sort of like the intelligence from the head of service at schools that we're meeting this afternoon, or from colleagues in finance that schools going through a particular problematic time, then it allows us the flexibility to be able to go into that school, and we're not sort of pre-specifying which school we're going into.
Yeah, because I think you've really answered it, because my concern is when you're working with schools and school governors, the academies, and we've known in the past, I think there's less of it now than there used to be, could get rid of the governors and virtually do it on a one-man band. That may very well have changed now over a period of time. And my concern was in terms of dealing with governors, what's the approach in terms of where academies have very few governors?
Academies are outside the scope of our audit plan. They have their own internal audit arrangements.
Right, Chair. Are we saying then, I'm just trying to understand, and I'm with that, that's fine. Well, I don't think it is, but we are where we are. Because the stance we've got is that, and it doesn't matter what political persuasion may be controlled by an authority, they've got the same issue that they blame the authority if anything happens to the school, rather than the academy, which is now running it. And that's where my concern lies.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we've got no jurisdiction over any of the academies. If they want to come to us to buy our internal audit service, then we're open to that, but that just doesn't happen.
You, John? Anything, Glenn?
Yes. Apologies, I'm just trying to find
No,
my
I
notes.
think you want me to go on.
No, it's okay. Sorry, thanks, Austin. Just in terms of the audit plan, Peter, I obviously Grant Thornton do their ITGCs as part of their external audit, but just drilling into our IT coverage in here, I saw that Salford are doing a piece regarding third parties, but there were just a couple of areas, and I just wondered where we might be picking these up. So just in terms of our overall exposure and move to cloud systems, are we picking that in the audit plan? And also general cyber security and operational resilience of our IT systems, including ransomware, how is that being picked up in the plan? And is that likely to be picked up by Salford as well?
Okay, so Salford have just recently done a needs assessment. The results are with us this week, and then we're having discussions with ICT and Digital over further planned coverage. We've got the third-party supplier within there, and we'll be determining any other works that are needed on a needs basis. Okay.
Peter, on paragraph 7.1 on page 110, some details are given there regarding the recruitment to increase data analysis capacity. Can you tell the committee what progress has been made on that particular item? And also, are you confident that the plan can be delivered?
So with regards to the recruitment, Chair, we've got interviewing taking place. It's actually next week now, yeah, so that's live. With regards to the delivery of the plan, I think I'd probably be fairer to say I'm 100% confident we won't deliver that plan, but we will be, because we'll be altering the plan as always happens, and I'm happy that the plan that we do deliver will be sufficient to meet the authority's needs and to be able to, for me to be able to provide an annual opinion, Chair.
Thank you. And one final question on the plan. And as you know, Pete, I attend the Yorkshire and Humberside Chairs of Audit Forum, where I'm now meeting many chairs of audit from that area that's covered by this programme. So can I ask if our approach regarding the internal audit plan is similar to that adopted by other local authority internal audit teams, or is it different, or do they follow a theme?
Chair, so yeah, I believe that our planning process is similar to other authorities. I'd like to think it's a lot more risk-based and agile than other teams that I've come across. I'm not saying that we're the most sort of risk-focused and agile and data-driven, but you know, we're certainly better than the median. I'd be very confident in saying that, Chair. So the approach is consistent. It certainly meets professional standards, as we had concluded from our external quality assessment last year, and it keeps up with professional standards, I believe, Chair, yeah.
Thank you for that, Peter. No further questions on this item, colleagues. I'll move to the recommendation. The Audit Committee is asked to support the principles and strategy underpinning the 2023-34, it says on here, 2023-24 Internal Audit Plan, as set out in Section 1 and expanded upon in section 7 of the internal audit plan report, and consequently approve the plan as set out in appendix 1. So happy to do that, colleagues, and move and second it? Yes, thank you very much. So the recommendations are agreed. And we'll move on to item 12, the counter fraud activity report. So again, we'll take the report as read, and Peter, this is back to you again. So any additional issues for our attention? If you want to make us aware of them, if not, I'll hand over to you to present the report.
Yeah, just a quick summary again, Chair. So, as I said just a few minutes ago, it's the same format as we've adopted for the last 3 years now, in line with best practice. There's a horizon scan for new fraud risks. We've got an assessment of current fraud risks summarised on a fraud heat map on page 144. We've got a presentation of the counter fraud plan for the council. That's been included within the mainstream audit plan from the previous agenda item. And then we've got a summarised fraud risk register, Chair, so happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Peter. While it's fresh in my mind, you mentioned a couple of items that I noted down. Horizon scanning, if you could just give us a little bit more information regarding horizon scanning for new fraud risks. I know in the report you say that obviously authorities and other public bodies are constantly playing catch up with limited resources. I just wondering how the horizon scanning operates. And the other one, fraud risks, on page 141, we have there a fraud heat map. Is that 141? Have I got it on 141? I might have got the wrong page number there. Yeah, it's on 142. So I think that's a new diagram. I don't think we've seen that one before. Perhaps you just give a little bit of a rundown regarding that one, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, Chair. So the horizon scan is picking up on any topical areas regionally or nationally where there is the susceptibility to fraud affecting the local authority. It'll also pick up on sort of broader national issues, so austerity due to the cost of living crisis might heighten the risk of fraud against the authority, so we've amended and reflected that in our risk assessments. Then we also take into account any particular local issues within that horizon scan as well. The heat map that we're showing is a relatively new document. I'm not sure if it was in last year's as well, but yeah, it was in last year's as well. And it's an area that we're trying to develop for the rest of the council, as I touched on in my annual report. It then gives better visibility of the areas that were cited on and the areas that we're providing some audit input into, whether that be by undertaking a planned audit in that area or contributing through sort of advice and consultancy. It gives, as I say, better visibility over us putting our resources into the right places, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And just finally, I just wanted to ask your opinion on the document itself and the assessments made within the document, sort of regarding the adequacy of our arrangements. Are you comfortable with the arrangements we have in place?
Yes, Chair. So there was some best practice guidance in this area issued 3 years ago. I went through that in some detail when it was issued, and then when this report was drafted for me, I was able to see that it certainly met that best practice, and I haven't checked other peers' report or other authorities' reports in this area, but I haven't heard of anybody sort of touting theirs as being best practice. So I'm happy that this is a good quality report, Chair, reflecting best practice.
Thank you, Peter. John?
What am I? It's more of a comment than a question, really, Chair, if I may. And that is, and I've read it in some of the other reports that we've just approved, and that's resources. And I know that's a factor that's affecting all authorities. I'm gobsmacked at this on page 139 on the horizon scanning, where we're potentially losing 52 billion a year, and yet the resources allocated to try and detect fraud is, well, my words, minuscule. And I don't know how we address that, Chair. I really don't. Whether or not we go through the LGA and put pressure on the government, etc., I just don't know. Because we're under a squeeze, as a lot of authorities are under a squeeze, but it's resources that concern me. But when you see figures like that, we should have greater help.
I think, Chair, that's the sort of sentiment of a lot of the counter-fraud specialists, and I think it's just reflective of the general environment in which we're operating in as local authorities. What it means is that we have to use our resources, my resources in the audit team, very wisely and very smartly to make sure that we are driving the best value that we can out of every hour of the work that we don't get involved in doing sort of big onerous manual checks, trying to use the data, the analytics to give us sort of like whole population assurance. The counter-fraud plan is sort of like an assessment of the sort of pure counter-fraud work in terms of reactive investigative work and also the more counter-fraud work. The mainstream audit plan has a lot of audit work set out in there, and the two are very separate documents as such. However, there's elements of both control and governance within the counter-fraud plan, and there's elements of counter-fraud within the mainstream planned work and the advice and consultancy work that we do. So there isn't a very specific split. We've put sort of like a negligible amount of full-time equivalent officer resources going into this area, but what I have got is the ability to be able to push more into the counter-fraud side, should that be required. As we've been reporting in the last few years' annual fraud reports, this council is experiencing very low levels of fraud, thankfully. I think we can put a lot down to the strong culture that we've got within the authority and the control arrangements. Certainly going back quite a number of years, we were dealing with a lot more sensitive fraud type related issues, and we're in a much better place there. So at the moment, hopefully the resource that we've got going into this area is proportionate to the problem that we experience.
No, I think mainly it's quite pleasing to see. I did spot in the heat map that you've got cyber risk sitting out on the right hand side. Does that bubble incorporate something like APP fraud, approved push payment fraud?
It will do, yes. Cyber fraud is obviously incorporating many strands, and the audit needs assessment that's being provided to us will break those down, because to try and sort of just audit as such cyber fraud would be a very large time consuming audit, so it would get broken down, and if there's any of those specific areas that we need to look at from a needs assessment, then we'll do so. But we have put, you know, very significant resources into the cyber fraud area in recent years. I think we gave a presentation to members about 2 years ago, where we sort of tried to set out our sort of overarching arrangements without going into too much detail, and that should hopefully have been providing some assurances to yourselves as to how serious that we're taking that particular risk.
Sorry, maybe if I'll come back to you, but Pete, have we, in IT, I don't know what the directorate is, but in IT, haven't we recently established a cyber team? Is it out of its cyber fraud team or a cyber team that's recruited? I don't know if it's just internally or probably externally, experts to counter this problem. And do you work with that team from the business that you're carrying out as well?
We have interactions with that team, picking up on certain issues. And
Yes, that's right. It was approved as part of the budget. Right. And as you said, it's we've got two elements: internal resource as well as phone a friend, as I refer to it. So it helps in terms of that resilience. So we're in a good place in terms of that. Cybersecurity team, yeah, which obviously this is about considering, because cybersecurity is about protecting us as an organisation, whereas this is about the arrangements we have for like post-mortem almost. The point I just wanted to make really is, because we've got such effective arrangements, and the paragraph that was drawn out, that is largely about the public sector as a totality, where the greatest level of fraud will be particularly in relation to DWP and HMRC. So we assess the transactions we have and the appropriateness of the resources we apply to that. So I think that's whilst it's talking about the public sector landscape, the greater risk will be elsewhere in the public sector. And those matters have been considered by the Public Accounts Committee nationally. So, you know, I just wanted to set it in context. The risk we have is based on the nature of the transactions we have. And like we were just talking about money laundering previously, the sort of level of activities we have we're fairly low risk in that regard. The aspect would be around cybersecurity, cyber, and so that's really why we've introduced the additional resources in order that we protect ourselves at the front door rather than it being a reactive audit matter.
Anything else, colleagues, on this item? Anything else? Right, I'll look for the recommendation to item 12, the counter fraud activity report. The Audit Committee is asked to support and approve the counter fraud plan and the assurance map, which maps all proposed activities to fraud risks. Moved and seconded, colleagues, all agreed. Move on to item 13, external auditor, Grant Thornton, audit plan 2022-23, and the arrangements for the preparation of the 2022-23 accounts. Take the reports of read, so I'll ask Gareth and Perminder and Grant Thornton if they wish to bring anything to our attention, or if anything's to be added to the report since it was drafted. Gareth and Perminder.
Thank you, Chair. You have our audit plan for 22-23 in front of you. We developed our plan based on a risk-based approach, and in undertaking that assessment, we considered lots of different factors, from a sort of very broad national context to details at a much lower and more relevant level, which are relevant to the authority, a bit like horizon scanning that was discussed a couple of items ago. So the national context obviously is that there is rising inflation above 10%. That's resulted in energy, food and fuel costs rising and going up. And that of course does impact upon local government itself in terms of the budgets that you have. They're being stretched. And added to that, obviously, there are the impacts of increased pay as well that are required to be paid to staff. In terms of the council's particular financial position coming down to a more local level, for the prior year, 21-22, you actually delivered an underspend, which was quite a good outturn given the position and the additional costs carried over from COVID-19 for the previous couple of years. For 22-23, you did set a balanced budget, but the last Q3 finance and performance report that was considered by members on the 1st of March noted a potential overspend of 7.8 million. So the financial pressures are impacting upon the council, and we do know that you are trying to manage that through additional savings, but as a backstop, that will be picked up and balanced in year by the use of reserves. Other factors which impact on the council at the moment are Doncaster Children's Services Trust, which came back in-house on the 1st of September, and there are issues around how that is accounted for and brought back into the council's accounts, given it was part-way through the year. And then over the page, I'm looking at page 164 of the pack. The other couple of areas that sort of we're aware of around issues for the authority related to Doncaster Sheffield Airport. The airport obviously closed to flights in November of 22, and despite efforts by the council to secure its future. And a recent report, I think only a couple of weeks ago, you are looking at a number of options to try and acquire the facility, and that's through either purchasing, leasing, or you are also considering as a last resort the possibility of compulsory purchase order. Just on that particular one, we know that officers are continuing to obtain professional advice, which I think is quite important given the significance of that particular acquisition if it does proceed to where you want it to go. A couple of good points to note. City status, you became a city on the 1st of January, following that being granted in the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, and His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort visited you on the 9th of November to bestow city status, which is really pleasing to see. I think the other point to draw out, and I think we've picked this up on, I think one of the agenda items earlier around the delays in accounts publication, and we'll pick that up as part of our next report in terms of our update paper, so we can come back to that. In terms of our actions and what we're proposing to do, well, our responses are set out in terms of each of those areas on slide 165. I think it's just important to draw out that we remain committed to audit quality. I think it's also important to note that we'll continue to monitor the council's financial position as part of our regular dialogue with senior management, but also as part of our work on value for money, in addition to looking at your governance and economy, efficiency and effectiveness arrangements. A couple of areas that we will be focusing on as part of our work will be around Doncaster Children's Services Trust and how you account for that. And we've had regular dialogue with the finance team around how you plan to bring that back into the accounts of the council for the 7 months and how it's accounted for the 5 months where you actually were paying them a payment in terms of a charge. The Ofsted inspection was something we looked at last year, and I know a lot of work is ongoing in that regard, so we will follow that up as part of our work also. I think it's important just to note that given the pressures that all authorities are facing, we have identified an increased opportunity for organisations to potentially manipulate their financial statements given the increasing financial pressures, and I'm not indicating that's an issue here. It's a risk that we've identified more broadly, and that links into one of the significant risks that we've identified in our plan, which is around the management override of controls. So just moving on to slide 167 of the pack, the key significant risks that we've identified that we'll be undertaking detailed work on are around the management override of controls. Now that's a required risk area that all auditors are required to cover, but I think it's enhanced this year given the pressures that local government is under. The valuation of land and buildings, that's one of the biggest numbers in your accounts, is another area that we'll be focusing on to ensure that valuation is appropriate and correct. And then also looking at the net pension fund liability, which again is another big number on your balance sheet. Given Doncaster Children's Services Trust is coming back in-house, we felt there are significant risks around how that is accounted for, and that's been identified as a significant risk area. In terms of materiality, has been set at 10.648 million for the group, slightly lower for the council, and we've identified trivial as 532k, And trivial is a number where if we identify anything below that, we wouldn't routinely report that to management. However, we do discuss that with management. Anything above that is reported to the audit committee. In terms of audit logistics, we've completed the bulk of our planning work. The interim work will probably take place now in July, and then we'll kick off our final accounts work from July onwards. The aim is that we try and complete our accounts audit work by the end of October, with a view to taking our audit findings report to the November audit committee. The outputs that we produce are this audit plan, the audit findings report I've referred to, and we're hoping to complete our work on value for money by the end of the year. In terms of a couple of other points I just wish to raise, the group audit approach is set out on slide 173. Obviously, St Ledger Homes of Doncaster will be consolidated into your accounts. Doncaster Children's Services Trust will be incorporated for part of the year, but the exact accounting arrangements we are in dialogue with the council's officers. In terms of our other responsibilities, these are set out on slide 175. So we read your narrative report, review the annual governance statement that's here today in draft. And we also express our view on the whole of government accounts once we've completed our work, and of course provide that to the National Audit Office. And indeed, we do consider any objections that are raised by local government electors. We followed up the outstanding recommendations from last year, which is set out in section 6 on page 176. There were 3 recommendations, 2 have been actioned. The final one around password setting for the Northgate system, we're just waiting for a final update, whether that has now been done given there has been a system upgrade. I think just want to draw attention to the fact that there are no independence issues that we need to bring to your attention, and our audit fees are set out on slide 185 of the pack. You'll note that the proposed fee is slightly less than last year. So in real terms, given where we are with inflation, it's in essence a cut and a reduction. I think that's sort of the key points I wanted to draw out, but we'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paminda. Questions this morning? John? Glenn, do you have anything? While you're looking, then I'll just ask mine. You touched on it. I mean, I've got it down as page 175 in the hard copy. I think you said 176, 177. It's the progress against the prior year's recommendations. And I've just noted that it's both pleasing and positive to see that 2 of the 3 items are noted as complete. And it would be pleasing and positive to obtain confirmation regarding the 3rd item at the next committee meeting. And I guess you're going to tell me it's done now.
Yes, we've confirmed it's been complete, and we've passed that on to Grant Thornton as well.
Sorry, I was just getting my figures together. Just looking through the audit plan, obviously given my background, I'm immediately drawn to the IT audit approach and the strategy. And just 2 areas I just wondered about our approach to doing ITGCs. Couple of questions. One, are we looking at privileged access in particular regarding the E5 ERP system? And also within that, would we look at the vendor's privileged access with it being in a cloud environment? And then also a question on the back of that is, what are we doing about our strategy and potentially moving to cloud? Would that fall in our IT audit strategy?
Okay, so I'm not an IT expert, so I can only tell you what I am aware of, and if need be, we can take away any questions and check those. Our IT audit strategy is principally focused to review the key systems that the council uses to ensure the integrity of the information that is produced. The ITGC, so IT General Controls, we look at all of those and gain an assessment around the adequacy with industry standards to try and confirm that you are actually at a place where we would expect you to be. So a good example of that would be the follow-up recommendation from the Northgate system around password controls. So in that regard, we do look at access and access rights. That's considered as part of the routine work that we undertake. So if we feel that you have officers that are perhaps in the service area that have access rights inappropriately, we would then raise that with you as something for you to consider. As regards the cloud environment, I think I can't really give you a real full answer on that, other than to say that as part of the work, we would look at your arrangements to secure your data and data security. So if that was up in the cloud, there may be some areas around the ITGCs, but I would need to check that. And do you want to do that?
Yeah. Sorry if I could just add, the colleagues that lead this work, Councillor Bluff, our IT technical risk specialist team, and they lead the ITGC work across all of our major audits. So those are audits where the I&E is above 500 million, of which clearly Doncaster's in that category. So they are a very sort of specialist team who are used to delivering this type of work across a number of local authorities, NHS bodies, commercial businesses and not-for-profit businesses across the country. So, that gives them, I guess, the understanding and knowledge of varying sort of IT systems cross-sector and across the country that helps inform their judgments in terms of some of the things that Perminda mentioned, whether, the controls at Doncaster perhaps are in line or perhaps need enhancing or are in excess of what they see elsewhere.
You wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm going to start from the bottom upwards, I guess, in terms of when we're introducing systems, we obviously we have checks and balances as part of that, and that's our obligation to ensure the efficacy of those. And as part of our internal audit arrangements, obviously there's a review of those, and as you can see within the earlier report, most of the key systems that the council has are undertaken through that review. So in terms of the first layer of defence or first line of inquiry, I would say is it sits with the council's responsibility in terms of ensuring that. I don't, in my head, I don't see the cloud being any different just because it's stored in Iceland or under the North Sea, aka the cloud. I don't see that any different from it being stored, the data being stored or the system being stored on the SAN downstairs or in some other data control rooms. We should, those inbuilt controls within the appropriate system should be in play, whether, as I say, virtually or physically. And then the sort of final layer is effectively the external auditor considering. But I think for me, there's that check the checkers, checking the check-in in terms of ensuring that there's the efficacy of the system process controls.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, for both of you, actually. I mean, this system is quite a few years old. I found a news story going back to 2016, I think it was, when we implemented E5. Unfortunately, the way the world has moved on, especially around cloud, some of that, the kind of architecture going back to 2016 has probably moved on. Some of the security risks around it may have changed. So I would be interested in some kind of assessment of the risks that we have with all of these systems, really, going back to what you were saying, but maybe you could ask your team. But in particularly, I am interested in where we've got data in the cloud, because unfortunately the risk environment is different, Debbie. So it has quite a lot of third-party risks who have access to that data and their data residency as well. So
I guess why, in terms of me, mentally I had a hierarchy in terms of, and I think the obligation, as you're highlighting, in the first instance about ensuring the efficacy of that system lies with us. And when we talked about the phone a friend, so we've got Salford in terms of undertaking a review of, and we bring them in because we haven't got that level of expertise, whereas they have, they've tooled up accordingly, so that they provide a range of, that IT specialist internal audit function to a number of councils, but that it's that we so it's helpfully highlighting it, and we'll take it away, but it really, that would sit with us, and I would say as part of Pete's internal audit work.
yeah, thanks, Debbie. I mean, I do agree it sits with you guys as well, but the reason I wanted to just bring it up here is because if there is an incident there, it ultimately could lead to a material misstatement in the accounts, especially if they've got privileged access and they were to go in and do something. So it kind of affects both of you as well.
Paminda, you wanted to come back as well?
Yeah, I think just building on what Debbie said, I think you've also got to recognise that the systems that you use are national systems from big organisations, so they would update any potential flaws that have been identified as part of software updates. So as long as the council is updating any changes that have been recommended, that will ensure and perhaps safeguard you as much as you possibly can be, that the data that you have and the ability to for anybody to get into your systems is limited.
Praminda, you have more faith in big IT companies than I do, so but thank you.
Okay, colleagues, I'll move to the committee is asked to note Grant Thornton's audit plan for 2022-23 and arrangements for the preparation of the 2022-23 accounts. Move seconded, colleagues? Yes, and agreed. Thank you very much. Item 14, External Auditor Grant Thornton, Audit Committee Progress Report and Sector Update. We'll take the report as read. So again, back to Gareth and Paminda, or Paminda and Gareth. Gareth this time.
I'll take this one, Chair,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, obviously, as you've rightly said, Chair, you've had the report for a week or so now. So I think I'll just focus perhaps on a couple of issues. I think mainly pack page 192, headed up progress at 18th of April. Just to reiterate some of the content of that particular page, Chair, because I think it is important that we do comment on that. So, as I mentioned earlier, top left-hand side of that page, the 21-22 audit work was all concluded in January in terms of the VFM report, and also the accounts were signed off. The work was completed by the end of November as planned, and thanks to Faye and her team for their engagement in that, but we couldn't sign until that national issue relating to infrastructure assets had been resolved. The statutory instrument was issued on the 25th of December, and then obviously we were in a position to conclude the audit in January. So I think that was a really good achievement on all sides to get that concluded for an authority the size of Doncaster. So then we move on to the 22-23 audit, and I think in terms of the headline message, Chair, the statutory date for audited accounts currently stands at 30th of September, and I think that is highly unlikely that will be achieved here at Doncaster, or indeed at the vast majority of places across the country, even at those where the deadline perhaps was hit last year in terms of some of the smaller local authorities. I think there's some other factors at play this year which puts that even under some pressure. So we've had a number of discussions and training sessions, I think, over the last 18 months, Chair, highlighting some of the challenges within the public sector external audit market. and the Redmond review obviously touched on a number of those issues as well. I think some of those issues are starting to improve, but it's a long process, particularly in terms of building up the resilience of the market in terms of firms that are working within public sector external audit. The other issue that's impacted this year is the decision that the clinical commissioning groups ran on for an extra 3 months. So what that's done, Chair, is that has created over 100 part-year sets of accounts for CCGs and about 42 9-month sets of accounts for ICBs that all have to be delivered by and large by the same auditors that are doing local authority accounts. So that's a significant additional sort of work requirement this year over and above what would have been the case had CCGs demised on the 31st of March. So all those things considered, I think a realistic date that we should aim for is a November sign-off here at Doncaster. I'm having similar discussions with my other local authorities that I lead, and I think it is worth saying, Chair, that the sort of Yorkshire-based public sector audit team that myself and Perminda are a part of, we do have a very strong reputation for delivery of audits. So all of our 21-22 VFM work has been concluded, and all of our local authority 21-22 accounts work, with one exception, were all signed off by January at the latest. So as a local team, we are in a very strong position on delivery compared to the vast majority of other colleagues and indeed other firms. And we also, I believe, have a very strong reputation for audit quality. So the FRC have inspected 4 of our files over the last 2 years within Yorkshire, not Doncaster's yet. And I'll add the word yet, because you never know when the regulator is going to come knocking, but nevertheless they have reviewed 4 of our larger audits within this region, both accounts and VFM work, and those reviews have all gone very well. So I think from a delivery and quality point of view, you know, we're not standing on our laurels or becoming complacent, but we are as well placed as any, I would argue, in the country. All that said, I still can't commit to a 30th of September sign-off for Doncaster, because I don't think it's deliverable or achievable. Whereas I think November is a realistic date that we can aim for going forward. And as I put in that last paragraph on the left-hand side, Chair, just to be really clear, that's no way a reflection of Faye and her team or Doncaster Council. That's entirely my call on what I think is realistic and achievable in terms of our external audit work for 22-23. So then the VFM work, Chair, as we know, that's now had a few years where it's had a separate deadline, which is up to 3 months from the date of the signed accounts. We're not aiming to sort of extend it out to that length of time, Chair. So if all goes to plan and we conclude the audit in November, our aim is very much to conclude the VFM audit with management by Christmas and report that to the first meeting of this committee in the new year. So in essence, we're trying to get to a position here at Doncaster, and at the vast majority of all my local authority clients, where we conclude both the accounts and VFM work by the end of this calendar year, so that we can start 2024 and the first year of the new audit contract, in essence, back on a normal timescale, Chair. I think the rest of the report, as the usual sort of update, sector update in terms of financial reporting and governance. A couple of things just to draw out, Chair. One is the Grant Thornton publication About Time, which I believe Perminda circulated to management, and hopefully that's been sent through to you. I can see Faye nodding, so that's good, and that was shared with member colleagues. There's an analysis there around sign-off achievement over the last 6 years, Chair. As I say, I think that 12% is probably going to struggle to hit that level on 30th of September this year if it remains at that date. There are some discussions I know going on nationally that ourselves and the other firms are part of to see if that 30th of September date may shift slightly. but as it stands, it is the 30th of September, and I think given all the challenges in place, I think that's going to be a very small number that hit that. I think that was all I was proposing to say, Chair. I'm conscious, no client likes to hear news that a statutory date is not going to be achieved, but hopefully I've tried to provide some context behind that, Chair. And as I say, as a local team, our delivery and quality, I think, stacks up with anyone. But obviously happy to take any questions you or other members may have. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation, Gareth. Yeah, I think probably colleagues may agree that we weren't expecting the 30th of September to be achieved. So it's good that you're confident that you're going to meet the November sign-off date that you're proposing. And although that's, well, depends, it could be a couple of months late, it could be 3 months, couldn't it? No, it's the end of September. So is it likely to be the end of November, do you think, equally?
Yes, fair question, Chair. So I think the audit committee is right at the beginning of November. So certainly our ISA 260 report is planned to be presented. And in normal circumstances, so ignoring the infrastructure issue that hit everybody, or everybody that's got material infrastructure last year, our usual approach is to try and sign off sort of a week or two after that committee. So I suppose, we've put a backstop in the plan of the 30th of November, but if we can conclude it earlier in the month, then obviously more than happy to do that, because, rather than leaving Doncaster alongside all the other ones to the end of November, it helps to sort of smooth it out in the month if we possibly can.
Right, thank you. Probably I can guess the answer to the question, but do you think we'll ever go back to getting the signing off of the audit back to July?
I thought you were going to say September, Chair. So, but July, I think the answer to that is no, Chair. I think the regulatory environment that auditors are in now, quite rightly in some cases from the FRC, means that the level of detail and granularity that we go into, particularly on some of those big areas on the balance sheet, mean it's just not realistic to deliver the audit effectively in that well, as things stand, it would only be a 1 month window because NHS deadlines are the end of June. And if you may recall, Chair, one of the main issues in the Redmond review was the concertinaing of public sector audit work into a 3 month window. So pre-COVID, the NHS audit deadline was the end of May and your deadline was the end of July. And that 3 months from beginning of May to the end of July was such a push factor for people leaving the profession, you couldn't believe, Chair, honestly, because there was so much work in that 3 month window that people basically just left the profession. One or two just about managed to stick it out, myself and Perminda, but an awful lot of colleagues did leave and moved into working at an authority or NHS or decided to take early retirement. And it was also a factor in people at the bottom coming through from either school leavers or graduates had seen the sort of deadlines they'd be working to and said, well, that's not for us. So I think medium to long term, the end of September is probably a realistic date. But as things stand, I think certainly this year and even arguably the first year of the new contract, in most cases, it's still going to be unrealistic until the backlog that you mentioned earlier, Chair, gets shifted, because there's still a huge number of 21, 22, and indeed earlier than that, accounts still to conclude. And, one of the results of us as a local team being very good at delivery, as I say, we've only got one old year audit that's ongoing, has meant that some of our team are having to support other audit teams to try and get that backlog shifted, which to a certain extent starts impacting on our current year planning. So as Perminda mentioned, most of our planning is complete, but we're going to have to finish off some of our planning and interim work in the early part of July, largely as a result of us having to support colleagues elsewhere, because obviously from a national point of view, from Grant Thornton's point of view, we need to get that backlog cleared as quickly as possible. So we can't have a Yorkshire-based team racing on in front if the rest of the country is still playing catch-up. So, you know, we are working within those constraints. At some point, I think a 30th of September date is probably where auditors will be comfortable to sign up with. But as we've seen from some of the dialogue with government at present, we just don't see the 30th of September being realistic for the next sort of couple of years, certainly.
Yeah, thanks very much. Working in the industry, I do appreciate it. In fact, I think you've done a very good job. I'm very impressed, actually, with where you got to, and your suggestion about September, I think, is probably the right move. Just as an aside to that, I did ask Peter and Faye about some of our governance queries around Rule 16, and I know, Perminder, you offered Faye some comments on that. I would appreciate it, with your knowledge of the whole sector that you see, if you could help us get some kind of benchmarking or statistics around that, because I'm particularly interested in how we look for those kind of governance arrangements where cabinet decisions are taken urgently, how we compare nationally. And I know Austin meets other chairs at the forums, but I'd be interested in if you could help us with that benchmarking as well.
Hi, I think what we've talked about is that's for us to do an initial review, and we can kind of, so we've had an initial discussion with Pete, so we'll have a first, we'll have a look at that and produce something, and we can always kind of discuss it with Perminder. Like I say, they've provided some steers in terms of areas we might want to look at, so we can do that. So we'll have a first look at that.
But just again, thank you for your efforts. I think you've done a sterling job. Well done.
Thanks, Councillor Bros. That's appreciated, and Perminder and I'll pass that on to the troops when we're back in the office tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, just to echo Glenn's comments there, I think from an audit committee's perspective, I was going to say proud. I do really say proud of our financial team, and how, with all the challenges that we've had, not just recently, but a number of years ago, when the date was moving the other way all the time, when the accounts had to be finished by, stepped up to the mark, and we always hit the date that we had to hit. It's either ironic now that we're still meeting the dates, but I'm not blaming Grant Thornton anyway, because I echo Glenn's sentiment that we're going back the other way. And I do welcome your comments earlier about the quality and the timely presentation of the accounts from our internal financial team. So I want to pass on our thanks to that team, Faye, from the Audit Committee, that we are meeting our requirements. And the only danger of that is it's a bit similar to the waivers and breaches. You get down, there's only one way to go. And that's the wrong way, isn't it? You get down to zero, you're meeting the dates, the bar's being raised all the time, that you're setting yourself harder targets to achieve. But where we are now, it's a good position to be.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was important that you know, I put that paragraph in around you know, the delay, if you like, is entirely sort of my call. It's not in any way a reflection of Faye and her team or the council. And I think, you know, the council's finance team, you know, are, you know, really engaged in the audit process, which is, you know, from our perspective, that's great. It's not always the case. You know, proactive coming to us with issues. So, you know, just this morning, Perminder and I met with Faye and senior members of her team to talk through certain aspects of the DCST accounting, and that type of engagement and dialogue do all help to make the audit process run as smoothly as it possibly can, Chair. So I think, you know, your comments are absolutely fair in terms of the finance team. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it can sound like we're a bit negative with our comments in the chamber and some of our questions here, but it was quite telling in the fact that some of your national data at the back, your sector information, doesn't really apply to us. We're not having a problem with Zend. We're not one of the councils that's going to run out of money. So, you know, it just shows on a national level we are doing quite well.
Pick up on about time. You mentioned the about time, and it may be me that's missed it, Faye, because you said we've had it and you've circulated it. Because on page 198, delayed publication of audited local authority accounts, and there is a para 3 refers to a good practice checklist. Have we seen that? Has the audit committee seen that? Is that it's there, is it? Right, yeah. Right, okay. It's a completed document now, right. Okay, that's answered that question.